Hello, hello, and welcome to our first Homeschool Moms Unfiltered episode of 2026. Happy New Year, especially if you do Happy New Year's. It's a New Year person, not a Happy New Year person. But anyway, we are so glad that you are here. I'm your host, Amanda, and my awesome fellow co-host is...
Hello, I'm Meagan.
Hey, hey. So, Homeschool Moms Unfiltered is your source for secular, progressive, messy, and yes, as our name pretty much says, unfiltered homeschooling advice. Look, the advice is solid, but it's never going to be polished to a perfect shine. You can expect full, messy insights into our respective homeschool journeys and just life in general.
I like messy but solid. I feel like we should trademark that or something. That's pretty fantastic. All right, so yeah, it's 2026 and holy crap, are we starting with a bang, right? So I started working on my notes for this podcast the other day, and I was listening to another podcast at the time, and I'll share more about that in a bit. But then I was laughing so hard from the podcast, and I was so consumed by the podcast that I couldn't focus on what I was doing. So I switched to music. And then I opted for the original Broadway soundtrack of Les Miserables from 1987. And quite frankly, it just felt right. That is the energy that I'm entering 2026 with, right? Like, do you hear the fucking people saying, like, I'm ready, let's do this?
Well, we've talked about this before on the podcast, but that's my go-to protest sign. And then my kiddos is the emperor is naked. And when we went protesting with my parents, they were like, what is with the weird signs? And then when we actually got to the protest, other nerds totally got the references. And even one of the speakers quoted the emperor's new clothes. And my parents were like, okay, like we still don't get it, but it seems like you were onto something. And I was just kind of like, leave it to the homeschoolers, you know?
Exactly. So if you haven't figured it out yet, you're in a Black Lives Matter, Trans Lives Matter, my body, my choice, love makes a family, no human being is illegal type of space. Full stop.
Yeah. I mean, come on. Healthcare is a human right, no matter what the situation is in the United States right now. Poverty is not a freaking moral failing. Cheering on people who say shit that you would never, ever say to a coworker's face is like just beyond gross. Hating on immigrants in the land of the melting pot or the salad bowl or whatever else, like it just means that your white supremacy is showing. Like, screw that. Screw it all. But also, look at that. We really are coming into 2026 hot. I like it. I'm here for it.
Yeah, coming in hot. But you know what? Desmond Tutu said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. And so I'm done pussyfooting around. Like, I'm done. So 2026, let's do it. Right. So today we're going to be recapping our most recent book club read. Ironically, recapping our most recent book club read was our plan all along when we shifted our book club over to Patreon. But somehow we've missed at least one book, maybe two. Like, I don't even know. So, okay, so starting now.
Messy, but
Messy.
imperfect.
Yeah, exactly. So starting now, the plan is we will recap our most recent book club pick, which happened to be The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. I think that's how you pronounce it. Ironically, talk about like leave it to the homeschoolers. My social media feed is filled with libraries that put out social media content, and I just love it. They're all just kind of these small local libraries where it was like somebody tossed a librarian a cell phone and was like, put something on social media, and they come up with the most creative things, and they're not polished. They're good, but they're not polished. They're not people who are raking in influencer money. It's just librarians being librarians. And I get so many of them. And I mean, I get them because I keep liking them and watching them, but they're low production value, but they're genuine and they're creative. And it's on brand with libraries. That's what libraries do. So I saw one the other day and they posted a recap of the top 15 most checked out books at their particular library this past year. And this one, The Anxious Generation, was number 14. So I was like, apparently we're trendy. I like it.
It's not going to happen very often, but okay. Yeah. You can take it.
Yeah. All right. So we'll jump into the book momentarily. And if you thought our intro was feisty today, I'm really eager for you to hear Amanda's review of this book. It's going to be It's going to be something. I predict she's going to put the unfiltered into Homeschool Moms Unfiltered today. So, but first, we begin all of our episodes with a weekly recap. It's part of our anti-influencer, keeping it real kind of vibe around here. So, how's your week been, Amanda?
Wait for it. It's a shocker. I'm still sick. I seriously, it is the pneumonia or who knows what else it is now at this point that like just won't freaking go away. We're on like week 7, I think. I survived the antibiotics and the prednisone, and so I've got more appointments and x-rays and tests and things like that to look forward to this week. So yay, new year, new deductible, super exciting. And yeah, yesterday we spent the day at Legoland with friends for my kiddo's birthday. And look, I mean, it was good, right? The kids had a blast. It was super fun to see their tweens now, and they were palling around and riding rides on their own. And like the whole thing, it was just really fun to get to experience and be there with them. But I have a chronic pain condition. It is fairly well managed, generally speaking, and I'm usually chilling at like a 3, which is something that I can totally just live with for the most part. Today is no freaking joke. I'm solidly an 8. I hurt so badly, I couldn't even decide which type of medication to take this morning. Like, do I take muscle relaxers? Do I take hardcore painkillers? I can't take them together. Like, what do I do? Just sit here and cry? I'm not entirely sure. So, yeah, we'll see how this goes. And also, our winter break was only supposed to be like 2.5 weeks long, kind of typical winter break for people. But we are taking another week or maybe 2. I'm not really sure. But I am going to get better, and I am going to actually enjoy something, anything stress free. I don't know. Maybe I'm finally going to watch some Christmas movies in January, February at this point. I'm not really sure. Maybe I'm actually going to get some holiday baking done. I can still make Christmas sugar cookies in January and eat them
Mhm.
with my coffee. It'll be fine. But I am going to do something enjoyable once I am well. Other people made New Year's resolutions. I made a like, I am going to keep this holiday business rolling until I actually get a week off. Like, this is going to happen. And just a random aside for anyone who's new here, I am disabled and chronically ill. I've talked about it on the show before. Thanks to pharmaceuticals and lots of therapy, I mostly do a really good job of accepting and making the best of the life that I still have and getting out and doing what I can with the limitations that I have, even if none of it looks like I imagined it would. But, the reality is some days, weeks, sometimes even months are really freaking hard homeschooling with chronic illness. So if you came here for the progressive views and it just so happens that you also have a chronic illness and you're like, oh my gosh, someone's actually talking about it. Like, I'm here. I feel you. I get it. Yeah.
There's way more than I think people realize because I see it in groups all the time where people were like, I'm not even sure if I can do this because I'm chronically ill. Like, how does that work kind of thing? So we should just do an episode on that sometime. I'll just sit back and relax and you can talk the whole time and it'll be good for people who are in that situation. So yeah.
Yeah. But so how about with you? You ended up sick as well. There was some germ sharing at Portuguese school, right? And
Yeah. The dude who sits next to my daughter at Portuguese school brought some sort of funk, and then she got it, and then I got it, and then one of my kids just got a throat tickle and a little sniffle, so that wasn't too bad. I actually got it the worst, but I have a tendency to do that, and I think it's because it's that whole like we always talk about that whole like you can't pour from an empty cup, and we're like, sure you can. I do it all the time, right? Like,
watch me.
yeah, exactly. And so my cup is already like scraping the bottom of the barrel when it comes to emptiness. And so then when I get hit with something, it's that much harder because I'm so depleted. So I still have a little bit of a cough. That's always the thing that takes the longest to go away, though. But thankfully, I feel much better. So that's good. But other than that, let's see. So I've got a new year, new me thing happening, not because it's a new year, because I don't really do that. It's more a thing where last year, if anybody's been following, was all about getting us moved out of the US, which we did. And I had so much stress around getting our immigration paperwork lined up and all that kind of stuff. And I just got that stuff settled at like the end of September, beginning of October. And I was like, okay, now I can begin kind of living my life. And then one of my kids went into a very serious sort of mental health situation. And that has taken up months of getting to where we need to be. And I haven't talked about it much because that's their desire, is that it's not a mass public situation.
I can't imagine why.
Yeah, right. And so I feel like we're coming out of that now, which feels, I'm cautiously optimistic that we're coming out of the worst of that phase. And the reality is with mental health is it's cyclical, right? So these things, it's not like, oh, it's done forever, kind of thing. But yeah, so I feel like I finally, now I can maybe start to live again a little bit, like the immigration stuff. Okay, fine. Now this stuff. Okay, fine. And I realized the entire last year, I just did nothing for myself, like nothing. It was always stuff that the kids wanted to do and all that kind of, and that's fine. But a little bit for me would be nice. So if you're watching on video, I look a little bit been hit by a bus today, but that's because I went for treatment today. I've always wanted to have my lip pigment done because my lips on their own are just completely washed out and I look corpse like without anything on. I'm not one of those like fresh faced people that can pull that off. And so it was funny because I messaged this girl because it's holiday time here in Portugal, like everything shuts down. So she was like, I'm doing like huge discounts. Like I have like no bookings for this week. And I was like, oh, me, I like a huge discount. So it was so funny because I almost messaged Amanda as I was making the appointment and said, when are we going to record? And then I was like, well, like it is what it is. You know what I mean? If it lines up, it lines up. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So of course I had it done today. My lips feel like I sucked on a curling iron. They're swollen. They hurt. I think if you're not watching the video, I might sound a little drunk at some points during the episode because my lips really hurt. So people will be like, she's doing whatever the opposite of dry January is, I think. Like,
Hey, January is
no.
totally overrated. Unless you need it, and by all means, go for it. But I'm not here for
I,
that.
the great irony is I don't drink. So I have like a dry 12 months. And now here I show up sounding drunk
Like, I'm
on
so
January
bitter.
3rd.
I have been on medication for so many weeks that I have not had any holiday drinks. And I'm just waiting to be well enough to be able to enjoy a Christmas sangria or like a spiked hot cocoa. You're all, oh, the dry 12 months.
Yeah.
Oh.
And you're like, man, Megan's life is boring all year long. This is what she does all year. Yeah. So anyway, so I had my eyebrows reshaped. They were starting to get really gray and invisible looking. And so I had her darken my eyebrows and she did my lip. It's going to be fantastic once it doesn't feel like the world's worst sunburn. So if you're watching, I'm sorry. It's awful. But anyway, besides that, it's been a day. Today is January 3rd. We're recording. Today is the day that the United States decided to bomb Venezuela and kidnap Maduro. I am married to a Venezuelan, born in Venezuela. United States passport says birthplace, Caracas, Venezuela, which has been stressful for the last few months. He works in Aruba, which is about 15 miles off the coast of Venezuela. So really, really close. Airspace in Aruba has been completely shut down. There are no flights in or out. It's a 16-mile island and they're all just trapped there. So here's hoping everything's great. So we'll see. But I'm a history nerd. We've talked about it before on the podcast, but I just don't understand how half of our country couldn't see any of this coming. It's an open book test. It's all there. So we'll see how that develops. I did watch Heather Cox Richardson earlier. I could listen to her talk all day, every day. And when she's talking, she's always like, but that's a rabbit hole I won't go down. And I'm like, but please just do all the
I want that rabbit hole. Yes.
do all of them, please. I'm ADHD. I will follow your tangents wherever you want to go. I'm there, But yeah, so the only thing I will say though, like one of the highlights of my week, January 1st, my daughter was hanging out with a friend and we were out and about. So I ended up going to McDonald's to work for a little while. She was hanging out with a friend. McDonald's is the only thing open here on January 1st. And I listened to a podcast that at that point was 2 weeks old. So by the time you're listening to this, about 3 weeks old. But it was Trevor Noah's podcast called like What Now or something, I forget. But he had on at that time Mayor-elect Mamdani from New York City. And it was so freaking fantastic. I cannot even tell you. Like at one point I laughed so hard that I snorted in McDonald's and it was so embarrassing, but I don't even care. But there was a comment on there because Trevor Noah hosts it with a friend of his who I think is named Eugene. And there was a comment that was just like 3 immigrants from Africa vibing and I'm here for it. And that was it. It was so freaking hilarious. And Mamdani has comedic timing that is like unbelievable. And it was so good. So listen to our whole episode. Please don't tank our numbers. Listen to our whole episode. But then If you're interested, go listen to it. It was a great mix of like policy and intellect and ridiculousness. That was just like, so they had if you listen to it, the part about the noise and the volume of ambulances in New York City, that's where I snorted. I couldn't do it anymore. It was just freaking hilarious.
But that
So
is
yeah.
like that's like Trevor Noah's like niche. He brings really important topics up in ways that are really relatable and help you think about new interesting takes on it or consider things from other perspectives, but also with this comedic timing and
Mhm.
just kind of gloss over it that also makes you laugh while crying inside. Um yeah, that's solid.
Yeah, it was good. I loved it. That's what I was listening, and then I couldn't even focus on my notes anymore. I'm like, I gotta switch to something else. So that's when I switched to Les Miserables. But anyway, all right. So The Anxious Generation. The blurb for this book reads: After more than a decade of stability or improvement, the mental health of adolescents plunged in the early 2010s. Rates of depression, anxiety, self-harm, and suicide rose sharply, more than doubling on many measures. Why? Who put this long blurb for me to read on the day that my lips feel on fire? Anyway, I continue. I got this. In The Anxious Generation, social psychologist Jonathan Haidt. Oh, pronounced Haidt. Look, it's right there. It was in the blurb. Ah, look at that. We've been pronouncing it wrong this whole time. Okay.
Oh, well.
Jonathan Haidt lays out the facts about the epidemic of teen mental illness that hit many countries at the same time. He then investigates the nature of childhood, including why children need play and independent exploration to mature into competent, thriving adults. Height shows how the play-based childhood began to decline in the 1980s and how it was wiped out by the arrival of the phone-based generation in the early 2010s. He presents more than a dozen mechanisms by which this great rewiring of childhood has interfered with children's social and neurological development, covering everything from sleep deprivation to attention fragmentation, addiction, loneliness, social contagion, social comparison, and perfectionism. He explains why social media damages girls more than boys, and why boys have been withdrawing from the real world into the virtual world with disastrous consequences for themselves, their families, and their societies. Most importantly, Haidt issues a clear call to action. He diagnoses the collective action problems that trap us and then proposes 4 simple rules that might set us free. He describes steps that parents, teachers, schools, tech companies, and governments can take to end the epidemic of mental illness and restore a more humane childhood. Haidt has spent his career speaking truth backed by data in the most difficult landscapes: communities polarized by politics and religion, campuses battling culture wars, and now the public health emergency faced by Gen Z. We cannot afford to ignore his findings about protecting our children and ourselves from the psychological damage of the phone-based life. Okay, so that's the blurb. That's the description for the book. You read the book, Amanda. What do you think?
I mean, look, for me, I really struggle with the blurb in the same way that I struggled with the whole book. Because I am, if especially if you've listened to the podcast or you've been in any of our online communities, you know I'm pretty seriously anti-screens. We are locked down way more than most people in general. My kiddo got very little screen time when he was younger. Even now, as a 12-year-old, he isn't allowed unsupervised electronics. He's not allowed electronics in his personal space. Everything is done in our community space, in our living room. He's years away from having a smartphone or probably even an iPad. So, on the surface, I agree with the ideas in this book. But then once I actually started reading it, I was, let's just say, I was unimpressed with how the author, who just so happens to be a business and ethics professor handing out loads of parenting advice, how this author got to his assertions, which I'm sure we'll cover in more depth as we go. So let's go ahead and dig into the 5 big picture ideas that we pulled out of the book. So, first topic. This idea, the shift from play based childhood to phone based childhood, and how this led to higher anxiety in kids, more focus on image, the impact to self worth, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, I think for me, I do believe, based on peer reviewed research, that both too much screen time for children and too little free play for children really does hurt children in many ways. There's a lot of research out there that supports that. I think it's also worth noting if you are reading this book or listening to any kind of social media recaps or reading anything around this book, that he specifies phone based childhood to essentially mean smart devices with an internet connection. It's not just about the cell phone. So I do think that that's important. And again, to an extent, I can also see how issues with image are much harder to avoid these days. When I was a tween and well into my young adult years, I personally struggled with anorexia. When it got really bad and I had to start therapy and treatment, one of the first things that I had to do was cancel all of my magazine subscriptions and stop buying them at the grocery store. This was prescribed by my medical team. And that was all because of how much the models were airbrushed. And that was the extent to which that was happening was fairly new in the industry. And so these days, it is, I mean, if I use the what is it, portrait filter on your photos. Like everyone uses some kind of filter. And like the photo editing apps, I'm not very good at them, but they're for dummies. It's so easy to tweak everything to look amazing. And then all of the AI photos, there were all of those AI candy cane photos this past Christmas season. Almost no one looks like their photos anymore. So I do see how that's real, right? Like I do see how that's a problem.
I thought it was interesting in the section he talked about how much time and energy that kids are dedicating now to managing their online brand, what they're putting out there, the persona that they're putting. And it's so funny because that's been one of the hallmarks of our podcast was like, we're not going to play that game. We're not going to do that. We're going to show up however we show up and do our thing. And part of the reason we do it is because even adults in the homeschool space are managing their online brand. And so it's just perpetuating itself. And so I thought it's not a surprise that our teens are doing this because they're getting it from adults and maybe not directly from their parents, but adults that are in their world who are also putting out their fake ass image. It's just bananas.
Yeah, it's true. I find it interesting because on the one hand, I can absolutely see how it's more prevalent. On the other hand, I'm actually seeing it less now than I was even 5 or 10 years ago. And I'm by no means tapped in, but my tween, I don't see anyone that's kind of in his sphere that's doing this. And a lot of times I look to my niece several years ago, again, like 5 years ago, she was doing the online brand management and posting these kinds of pictures and things like that. And now she's not that much older. She's still in university, but she's pretty much left social media that way. She's not doing that and putting that out there anymore. And so maybe it's still there and it's still like that, but it just seems like I see less and less of it.
Mm. I do feel like as homeschoolers, we probably get just a little bit less because I feel like you do have homeschoolers who are choosing to do things differently. And that can look a whole variety of ways. But one of the ways might be less screens or less of that feedback mechanism from social media or something like that. And I feel like within the homeschool world, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes there's more of a tendency to embrace a kid who's got a unique circumstance or doesn't have a phone. And it's like, oh, okay, no problem. We'll text your mom or whatever. I mean, there's still assholes in every sphere, right? But I feel like within the homeschooling world, the same way that we do overall have, I would say, less bullying than you do in a traditional environment. I think there is a little bit less of a thing where it's social suicide to not have Snapchat or a phone or whatever the case might be. Not that it doesn't exist, but I think it might be just like a smidge better than if you're in the public school system or a traditional environment.
And so I see where you're coming from with it. And to an extent, I agree. I will say for me, I think the caveat is we live in Southern California. And here there are a lot of kids who homeschool because they either want to be or are in the music industry, in the theater,
Mhm.
in the movie
Yeah, totally
industry,
different.
in sports, because we have the Olympic Training Center here. And even within that group, I feel like you're seeing less of that kind of stuff. But I mean, I haven't done any kind of actual research on it, so that won't be
Yeah.
my hill that I die on. Just an interesting food for thought kind of thing. Now,
Mm,
one thing I will say that became apparent straight away in reading the book is he does use a lot of graphs and numbers to support his statements. And I do believe the numbers and I do believe the graphs. He cites his sources, and the last, I don't know, quarter of the book is how to go look everything up that he said. So I feel good in that. But he really does. I'm not a fan of the way that he chops the graphs to make them more visually compelling, right? So you'll have this graph that's saying there's this huge increase, and then the graph shows like the numbers 20 to 40%. And so, yeah, of course, the increase is huge between 20 and 40%. But if it was a graph of 0 to
0 to 100.
100%,
Yeah.
the increase would not be so like, oh my God. And I just don't like that. The numbers they're strong, they're compelling, let them stand on their own. You don't have to manipulate the way people see things in that way. I was like just not a fan of that.
Mhm.
We we have to have a lot more critical thinking skills to be able to really understand the whole picture, because especially with social media these days, a lot of people don't feel like it's their job to share the entire picture. They get to
Mhm.
pick and choose and skew things, and that does make it really hard.
Mhm.
I will say, to wrap up this first section, I do feel that the author overlooks a lot of bigger societal issues that have happened in the last few decades. And I think that a lot of those issues absolutely led to more anxiety for those coming of age during that time. But he just kind of brushes them aside in favor of going all in on this technology is 100% completely at fault. And we don't need to consider all of the economic crises and the world burning down and the rolling back of rights that were previously established. And I think you have to consider all of those things. They might be a lot harder to put numbers to, but you can't just be like, well, I can't put numbers to that. So we're going to pretend like it's not an issue.
But
That
phones
bothered
came out at the same time. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I
Yeah.
can prove that phones increase significantly, so that's the problem.
Yeah. I mean, I will agree with him on the fact though, and a lot of this comes from some of our coaching sessions that we do. And I think I might end up with a little bit more of that than you do, although I'm not in your coaching sessions that you do one-on-one, so I can't say for sure. But I end up with people who want a more organic kind of interest-led adventure for their learning, but they can't get their kids off the phone. They can't get them involved in anything in the real world and in life, and how to get them out of the house and how to get them to enjoy something. And so he refers to phones, or to your point, screens connected to the internet, as experience blockers. And I can see that. I think especially for neurodivergent kids who have that dopamine hit coming in just a little bit differently, it's so fast. And it's like, in the book, it's described as like drinking from a fire hose. And so there's very little in the real world that can hit that dopamine button so fast and so furiously like that. And so I did agree with him from that perspective of like, there are plenty of kids, I think, in this world who are missing out on life because they're glued to a screen in so many ways.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I'm generally anti-screen, so it's not like I'm going to disagree with that stance. I mean, I just don't
I was
like
thinking
how he got there
you
and how he supported it.
you not liking the book about being anti-screen is like me not liking the book that we read about unschooling with all the John Holt stuff. I should have liked that book, but instead I was like, what the hell am I reading? So no, I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
The next big theme from the book that we wanted to touch on today is the concept of over supervising our little humans in real life and completely under supervising them online. And so he basically comes in with this idea that the internet is like the Wild West. And we've had this tanking of freedom in the real world where kids can no longer go to the park by themselves, can no longer ride their bikes by themselves, all that kind of stuff. You can't go outside. You can't be in the front yard. You can't be unsupervised. But then when they're inside, they're online and there's very little supervision, statistically speaking, and how dangerous a place it can be for kids. And that hit home for me. I was like, yeah, that is so true. I mean, my kids are totally allowed to play in the front yard. They have been since they were peanuts. I'm very free range and very like, go, it'll be great. It's okay to do something when you're a little bit scared. Those are where you kind of break through and have great adventures. So I'm not a helicopter kind of parent, But I did really think that part about being online, like what all is out there. And it's like, oh, yeah, that's so true. We actually this year, sorry, it's 2026 now, last year, got an internet monitoring program, which I never thought we would be the type. I mean, I'm as free range, loosey goosey as it comes. And so I truly never thought that would be us. But I mentioned earlier about a mental health crisis. And so that was really the reason for it more than anything, was to just be able to see what Google searches were happening and any text messages that were alarming that I needed to be aware of in that sense. But yeah, I never thought we would be people that monitored the internet in that way. And then it was so ironic that we read this book at the same time that we had just installed that thing. And I was like, oh, look at us. We're like in this boat now.
Yeah, I mean, I I I will say I struggle with this because I I grew up in a really small town. We're talking a few thousand people. People are like, "I grew up in a small town. It was 15,000." That was a city for my parents when I was growing up. And I am now raising a child in the urban core of a major US city. We live in a big condo building that requires an elevator in and out and security gates and that kind of thing. And so when I was a kid, I had loads more freedom at his age than he has. And I struggle a lot with what's appropriate given our specific living circumstances. It's only when we are visiting our relatives in the Midwest that he's in a position where he can be playing in the neighborhood or in the front yard or the backyard or walking to the park by himself without it being a much bigger thing. And we do that when we're there. How do we do that in the city and what does that look like? And it involves a lot of other conversations about like make sure that you don't look too closely at the people who are selling and buying drugs on the corner because that can cause other problems, and make sure that you are really careful about how close you get to the tents that are on the sidewalk. It's a different conversation. But I do also have this bigger conversation with other people all of the time. And that is that the data says kids are safer these days outside of school, obviously, because hello, school shootings. But kids are generally safer than they were when we were growing up in the 80s. And I'm shocked at how many caregivers will look me straight in the eye and be like, no, you're wrong. They just do not care that that's what the data says.
Mhm.
And so I think it's a struggle to figure out how you do that and what that looks like. And it is bizarre that so many parents will fight and fight and fight that, like, no, we have to completely stay on top of everything that's happening and don't let them outside and don't this and don't that. And then, yeah, it comes to online stuff and it's like super under supervised. Uh,
Mhm.
I personally know way too many moms who have had to deal with cyberbullying and unsolicited sexual pics. I did not know that 7 and 8-year-olds could and did get dick pics in kids' messenger. Like, I know people that that has happened to, and they're trying to figure out what to do, and that's not freaking okay. And the parents thought it was fine because they were using kids messenger or kids YouTube or whatever it was, and the reality is it's just like that's not enough, right? The fact
Mhm.
that it's supposed to be set up for kids and designed for kids, like it's not enough. And I personally don't think that there's anything, any way out there that makes the internet truly safe for kids. I guess I just feel like if I feel like kids shouldn't be playing alone on the internet until they're of an age where you'd let them hang out at the mall alone with their friends. And for me, it's that idea of like at that point, hopefully, especially if you're listening to us, you've been like an active, involved parent and you're having lots of conversations about how to handle the many things that they'll run across and what they might see and who they're going to talk to and how they're going to reach out for help and all of that kind of stuff when they're out in the world alone without adult supervision. And I just feel like if you wouldn't let your kid go to Legoland by themselves or to the mall by themselves, you shouldn't let them go onto the internet by themselves. But again, I'm really conservative with my screen time and internet stuff. And so uh, the book, it's one of those things like on the surface, there are lots of things I agree with. And then the way that he puts it out there or how he gets to the things, I'm like, well, I don't agree with it that way. So it's been hard.
Yeah. I like that analogy though. The mall is a good analogy as far as a litmus test for the internet. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm, like, in shock about dick pics for a 7-year-old, though, like,
I
but were they
I
coming
know.
from people that they knew, or they were being hacked by strangers who were reaching
No.
them on Messenger?
S Someone a kid that they knew, someone's son, and like, "Oh, yeah, you can connect," and, like, it was a work colleague in one case, and she was like, talk about, like, awkward conversation of like, "Hey, boss, your kid sent my daughter a dick pic."
My goodness. I mean, we've had an internal, quote, unquote, like, TED Talk series within our family for years that has really all fallen under the umbrella of don't be an idiot on the internet, and it includes things like everything on the internet is on the internet forever, talking about sending and receiving nude photos, the fact that you could end up on a sex offender registry for sending unsolicited photos. I have hammered this concept. And it just happened not that long ago with one of my kids had a friend who was dating somebody, sent pictures, and then they broke up. And guess what happened to the photos? Everyone has seen them. So yeah, the author proposes 16 as the age of internet adulthood, like your mall example, right? But the interesting thing is I'm looking at it through a lens of unschooling, and I'm like, how the hell do you unschool without unfettered internet access? When I say unfettered, I don't mean my kids aren't watching porn on the internet, but the ability to just Google a question whenever it pops into their head is such a huge part of unschooling. And so I'm like, oh, how do you combine those two things? I'm not saying it's impossible to have safety checks in place and to unschool, but it's definitely a different dynamic than if you're sitting down with Beast Academy math books. The way we do it is so different, and it so heavily involves being able to just go out and explore whatever's on your mind at any given point in time. So it did cross my mind about how, if I had to do it all over again, how I would mingle those two things together, and it would be a
Hard.
lot of mental gymnastics to make it work. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Really, really hard. Yeah. No, I can see that for sure. Okay, so topic 3 that we pulled out is this general overarching idea of the loss of independence and the loss of risk taking for kids as they're growing up. And I mean, I feel like every one of these topics, I can be like, again, sure, I agree to an extent. And then he talks more, and I'm like, shut up, sit down and shut up. I'm in another parenting group where all of our kiddos are pretty much the exact same age. It's one of those like birth month groups. And we were recently talking about how many of our almost 12-year-olds stayed home alone. And I was honestly surprised by how many had not done it yet, like hadn't allowed their kids to stay home alone at the age of almost 12. And then most of the ones who had only been home alone for 15 to 20 minutes, 30 minutes or less. And I'm thinking like, well, by the time I was 11, I was babysitting my 2 much younger brothers on a pretty regular basis. So how do we balance that? And and it's that thing, laws and regulations absolutely make this harder for parents and caregivers these days.
Mhm.
Fear over nosy neighbors getting unnecessarily involved. I worry about that a lot because, like I said, we live in the city. I want to encourage my kiddo to go to the next block over to the bakery and get breakfast pastries for the family and bring him back, and he feels amazing when he does that, but every time I'm like, "I hope no one calls the police because there's a kid wandering around by himself," like, it's hard. And then add in the fact that you have just overscheduled families, whether it's the adults or the kids, there is just a loss of time. If you don't have the time for independence and risk taking, like, you don't have the time, you can't make more time. But again, the author, like, yeah. He has this almost yearning for the good old days. He brings up sleepovers and risk taking. And again, I grew up in a very different place from Megan, so my experience is probably a little bit different. But I'm not sure that I know a single friend from middle school or high school that wasn't touched inappropriately or exposed to something sexually inappropriate at some sort of a sleepover or over at a friend's house. And I I don't know why we're like, "Oh, that was the good old days." There are fewer teens dying from driving related accidents. When I was a teenager. My cousin died in a drag racing accident, and I had 2 kids who were good friends of mine that were seriously disabled in accidents, and this was just the norm. This was just like, "Who's it gonna be this year? I don't know." I was in a high school with, like, 400 kids, and it was like, "Which kid's gonna get in a serious major accident that ruins their life this year?" I think as a society, we definitely needed to eliminate a fair bit of that kind of risk taking that the author is so fondly looking back on with rose-colored glasses. Like, I'm good with that. I don't know.
Yeah. I so yeah, I mean, I didn't have a lot of those experiences, so I think a lot of that will just shape the way that I view the world differently. I
Yeah.
mean, that's how every person lives in the
Mhm.
world for the most part, basing it off of what they know and what they've experienced and all of that. And so I'm all about independence and risky play. I mean, I have pictures of my daughter. She would climb the banyan trees when she was like 5 in Florida. I mean, I'm not kidding you. She'd be a good 50 feet off the ground. But she was a practice tree climber. She loved it. And other parents would walk by when she'd be in the park doing this. And I'd be, like yelling up to her, like taking a picture or a video of her. And they would trace where I was looking or speaking and they would see her and they would be horrified. I was thinking about it when I was typing up my notes during the pandemic. My boys came up with this game where they found really long sticks isn't even the right word. They were like spears. They were really, really long. And they would sharpen them with knives. And they would play a game where they would stand on opposite sides of the yard and one would throw a kickball at the other one and the other one would throw the spear at the ball and try to see if they could stab the ball. And we went through quite a few kickballs. They got good at it. But I was like, this is a fun game. Sure, what could go wrong? But there was a thing in the book. It was a quote from a summer camp director that I thought was good. And they said, we want to see bruises, not scars, like when they're talking about kids. But to your point about nosy neighbors, not everybody feels that way. I would be so nervous taking my kids to the pediatrician when they were little because from their knees to their ankles, that shin bone all the way down the
Yeah.
front would be just one long series of bruises that were all at different stages of healing. Because if you think about it, when you're a peanut and you're climbing on something that's too tall for you at the playground, you're climbing out of the pool, you put your hands, you kind of push up a little bit, and then you throw one leg up and you plop that leg down and hoist yourself up. And so their shins were always so bruised. And I was like, oh, and I said something to the pediatrician one time, like proactively to try to be like, they play outside a lot. And she's like, no, I like to see that. This is okay. But not everybody feels that way. There are some who overreact. But I mean, listen, I know we've talked about it on the podcast. Not everyone can homeschool. It's a privilege to homeschool. Not everyone wants to. Not everyone can. All of the above. But I'm so baffled by people who are like, my kid can't walk to the grocery aisle one over to pick up a box of pasta while I'm in the bread aisle. But they send them to school where they could get shot like any day of the week. Like one is just an assumed danger that you're happy to, not happy to, but that you're like, okay, taking on 180 days out of the year. But the other one is like, terror instilling. They can't walk out of sight for 2 minutes. I'm like, I don't know.
I do think though that that is all of that like hard balance that we're talking about. And my struggle with the book is that I feel like in some ways, again, he's looking at this idealized rose-colored version of the established white man version of what happens. Well, unfortunately, sleepovers are a lot of times more potentially dangerous for little girls. And
Hmm.
there's a big difference between the potential of having your child molested or worse, because we know statistically, we know that happens with people who are in your inner circle, family, close friends, that kind of thing. Versus, I was definitely all about the go for it. The worst thing that's going to happen is you'll break something, like bones, they heal, put a helmet on and go for it. Like, protect the head. Otherwise, it'll be fine. And so, yeah, I mean,
Yeah. Well, and to your point, acknowledging the fact, and I've had this conversation with my kids, the fact that I mean, okay, so between us, we have 4 children. I have 3, you have 1. They're a mix of how they present to the world as far as ethnicity.
mhm.
So your child is not white presenting. I have a child who is fully not white presenting. Then I have one who's like, people kind of puzzle them out and go, what are you made up of? And then I have one who's fully white presenting, right? I saw a reel online the other day. Oh my gosh, it was a two-dad family, and I think they were Puerto Rican, or at least one of the dads was. And they came up with some sort of acronym. I forget what it was. It was like TWS or something like that. It was like the token white sibling. And I sent it to my kid group on WhatsApp, and I was like, "Oh, we have a token white sibling. That's so fantastic. If you ever need her, just pull her out and put her in the front of the line at passport control if you guys are traveling together." But I mean, I've had this conversation with my kids. Like my youngest one year, he had a drone that had gone over somebody's fence, and it was supposed to rain that night. And it was like they weren't home. And it was like, what do we do? What do we do? And I said, okay, I'm going to open the fence and I'm going to let you go in this person's backyard. I'm going to stand in the front yard so if they come home, I can say to them and explain and blah, blah, blah. But I go, I need you to understand that if you were a Black child, I would not be able to do this. This would not be safe for you to be coming out of someone's backyard with electronics in your hand. No one's going to ask questions first. I'm not going to have an opportunity to make that explanation first. And so our author probably doesn't have that experience either. So. But I will say, I loved, there was a thing in here in this section of the book about the biosphere too. I remember being obsessed with the biosphere when I was younger. I just thought it was like the coolest thing ever. And one of the things that they talked about learning from that was the fact that trees didn't grow well in the biosphere or didn't survive in the biosphere because of the lack of wind. And so there was a quote that said, "When the wind blows, it bends the tree, which tugs at the roots on the windward side and compresses the wood on the other side. In response, the root system expands to provide a firmer anchor where it is needed, and the compressed wood cells change their structure to become stronger and firmer." And it just reminded me, because I had read this article, I think I might have talked about it on the podcast before, but I can't remember, about the way climbing trees builds different neural pathways in kids' brains, because it's not an intuitive play structure that's been built and then assessed by safety practitioners to make sure that there's no way a kid could get hurt. And so their thought process changes very much when they climb trees. And so I loved the fact that it was a tree analogy in the thing about the dangerous play and the whole thing. I liked it. It all came together for me in a really happy, hippie, unschooling, free range parenting sort of way. I quite enjoyed it.
Okay. All right. I'm hearing it. All right, so we have more to talk about, but before we do that, we just want to make sure that you know our next book club is coming up. We have the book, we're reading it. The breakdown is out there. You can find it on our Patreon if you're interested. We'll probably remember to throw it up on our social medias on Instagram and Facebook. We might not. But the new book is How to Raise Kids Who Aren't Assholes: Science-Based Strategies for Better Parenting. And then from teens to tots, or from tots to teens. So it's supposed to be for all ages. It looks promising. Again, it could be one of those where it's like, I totally agree with everything on the blurb of the book. And then we read it and it's like, how did she get there? We'll see.
But
If you
either way,
want
the
to,
conversation is good.
that's it. The conversation will be really good because it's nice to be able to talk about these things with like-minded other caregivers and parents. So if you want, come join us. The actual discussion happens every other week over on Patreon. You can use the code bookworm. It's all one word, capital letters, bookworm, for 90% off your first month. That makes it like less than $1. Come join us. And there's no pressure to actually read the book. You're welcome to get it, read parts if you want, but just come and participate in the conversation. And then before we go, before we get back to the book, I want to say I need to give a big shout out to Susie May Wander. So if you're listening, Susie May Wander, I'm so sorry. Bringing the holiday joy and magic while also sick meant I dropped a lot of balls, and somehow I completely missed your buy me a coffee. And since I'm the one out of the two of us that posts the social media thank yous, you didn't get one. So again, I'm really, really sorry, but I do want to sincerely say that we so appreciate not only the support, but the kind words. I saw the message, and Meagan did respond to the message that came through Buy Me a Coffee, the actual website, but I didn't get to do the actual thing. So again, if you are listening, thank you so much for the Buy Me a Coffee, Susie May Wander.
Mm-hmm. And as someone who doesn't drink alcohol or coffee, and no, I'm not a Latter-day Saint, but still don't drink coffee or alcohol, I still love getting cups of coffee. It's so much fun. I love it.
Yeah, I mean,
Makes
that's,
my day.
yeah, I think that's one of the nicer things that kind of came out of like influencers on Instagram, some of the different people that I like watching their different content and stuff, I will randomly send a coffee just as a way of like, hey, I really appreciate that you're still putting out this content. And I know you don't make a ton of money doing this stuff unless you're always buying their gummies or their fire blankets or their lady toys. They're not making a lot of money off of what they're doing there. So, yeah, anyway, I like the whole buy me a coffee system.
All right. Theme number 4 from the book is how these changes, societal changes, the anxiety, the self worth, blah, 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 affect boys and girls differently.
Okay, so first off, you say how they've affected boys and girls differently, but the author specifically says on more than one occasion that it's been worse for girls than boys. And that really bothers me. And I'll get into that later, but you can go ahead with your points. But for anyone who's listening, you need to understand that the author, and it was even in the blurb that we read at the top of the show,
Mhm.
the author very clearly is like, this has been way worse for girls than for boys. So keep that in
It
mind
was
as we
interesting because I
discuss.
felt like when he was talking about girls, he was like, it's terrible for girls. And then when he was talking about boys, he was like, it's terrible for boys. It felt like whoever he was talking about, he was like appeasing that crowd almost. It was like an interesting dynamic. I mean, the things that I took from this, which I thought was really interesting, was there was a thing in there where he said that for centuries, men's self worth has been tied to their physical strength and size and their ability to chop down trees and rope cattle and lay brick and blah, blah, blah. And so then after the Industrial Revolution, and then we get into the shift into the corporate world and corporate America, that in the big picture way, he says that the corporate world suits the natural skill sets of women better because they have more soft skills and this, that, and the other thing. And that men are now no longer valued for their ability to physically provide. And it was interesting because I'm like, if that's true, having worked in the corporate world for 10 years, if that's true, I'm like, is that why they're such assholes in the corporate world? Or is that a factor, I should say? Not the reason why. I think they have plenty of reasons to be assholes. But the company that I worked for, I was there for 10 years. We had a single female vice president by the time I left. One.
Yeah. No, I can't even. Okay. If you are just listening, you are not seeing the ridiculous faces that I'm making. You should probably go watch this section on YouTube just so you can see how incredibly unimpressed I am with the fact
Yeah.
that this is his stance.
So in my mind, I'm like, is this, I think so subconsciously, I don't think that men are doing it on purpose, not because they're not that evil genius, but more because they just don't put the dots together like that, maybe necessarily. Or maybe it's just the ones I worked with. But the ability to hold women back in the corporate world was Olympic gold medal. It was just fucking ridiculous. To put it this way, and watch, I know somebody from my old company who years later got called because of something on their resume, and HR called him and was like, you can't speak negatively. You have to take that off. It had circulated. So watch me get a phone call. But here's the deal. I was in my job for 10 years. I hated the whole corporate machine. I left because I wanted to have more time with my kids. They replaced me with a guy who came in at a higher fucking title and he didn't even last a year and they got rid of him because he sucked so bad. And so I'm like, is that what you're doing? Is it some sort of like subliminal, oh, I am not valued for cutting down trees anymore. So therefore I suck in corporate America. And so I have to hold women back because otherwise they're going to push past
Oh,
me. Like, what? What are we
I just
doing?
call bullshit.
Yeah.
I just call, oh, they can't show physical strength anymore. So poor men. It's so bad. Like, okay, I looked it up because I was like, I need to know specifically. So, of the Fortune 500 companies in 2025, the most recent statistic is that 11% of the CEOs are women. Don't fucking tell me that their soft skills are making them a powerhouse in the workplace after the Industrial Revolution. And only 33% are on boards. Like, sit down and shut up. Men are still ruling everything,
Dominating.
and they're less educated than women on the whole. And
Yeah, which was in the book. That so you're not pulling that out of your ass. That was in the book. Was this thing about how women have, statistically speaking, again, more degrees, higher levels of degrees, and it's like, yeah, because we
and men
have
can't
to.
stand up to them, except they're still dominating fucking everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but we have to do that in order to be taken even
Yep.
maybe halfway seriously in your
Mhm.
fucking playground that you won't let us in. So, no.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then it's like, why don't people want to work? Well, I'll tell you why I don't fucking want to work. I can let you know that much, right?
Yeah. Yeah, right.
I did that for 10 years. I left my kids every day for 10 years. I drugged them on fucking Motrin when they had fevers and sent them to daycare because I had no time off and couldn't stay home. And I know that probably as someone who has chronic illness and you're like, oh my God, keep your germy kid home. What was I going to do? What was I going to do except go to work and feel like a shit mother all for so that when I left, some guy could come in at a higher pay grade than me? Anyway, fuck off. I can't. Done.
Well,
Never doing it again.
I mean, that's the problem is that so many families are in the position where that's what they have to do. But then it means that the families who are in a position where they can't participate in that or participating in that system really can mean hospitalizations and worse health and all of that. You have to make these impossible decisions and then you make the decision that works for your family and you make the best of it. Anyway, yeah. We said something about being feisty for 2026, right? I think for me, under this whole boys and girls affected differently and it's worse for girls and yada yada, I look specifically at all of the red pill content that's out there and things like that incredibly scary stat that came out recently about college age young women who have been choked without consent during otherwise consensual intimacy. And and yes, it is horrible for young women. That should not be happening to young women. But I'm not about victim blaming here. We are not going to victim blame. This is not a like, oh, it's so bad for the young girls. The boys are doing it. This is not like
Mhm.
boys will be boys nonsense. And I just feel like I we body image is a huge problem and it is worse. And we need to address that. But body image has always been a huge problem. And so many young people, but young women especially, have to learn to work through that and deal with it and come to peace and find body acceptance and all of this kinds of stuff. A lot of times in their 20s, right? I feel like that's kind of a pretty normal age and into your 30s maybe. But
Yeah.
this,
I'm like, took me a
you know,
long time to get there.
I'd dare be a lot younger because I was like way down that rabbit hole. But we have to deal with it. We have to address it. And for so many, we come out on the other side much better and ready to help the young kids in our life not see the world that way. It is not the same for these dudes who are growing up thinking that women are inferior and all of this incredibly toxic stuff about the inequality and how they're being held back and the male loneliness of it. Like it, I truly am not sure that you can re-educate and reprogram even 50% of the boys who grow up thinking this way into reasonable men who are going to have mature, respectful adult relationships. And so tell me, like, yeah, that's bad for girls, but that's a boy problem. That's a boy problem. I don't, yeah.
Yeah. No, it is. I know. When I read the thing, I was just kind of like, okay. I mean, we are hearing about this, right? It talks about the fact that boys are escaping into these video games to live out these scenarios and whatever that they can't get in the real world, and it's causing them to retreat from society. And I'm like, ah, I'm sorry, who's the delicate flower among us now? Like we're always being told like, oh, too emotional, too weak, too this, too that. And I'm like, oh, you don't feel like a big man in the real world, so you're gonna go shoot fake characters in video games. Okay.
All right. So the last one that he brings up and the last couple of sections are he's talking about the downfall of society thanks to screens and social media, but he does specifically go into what can we do? And he talks about it from a government level, a school level, and then a parent level. So what can we do if we're concerned? And so one of his big things is this idea of advocating to raise the age of internet adulthood to 16. Meagan mentioned it earlier when it came up in another one of the sections. This is under something that governments should do, but the adults should be advocating for and pushing their governments to do. And I mean, for me, I just feel like the horse is already out of the barn. I'm not seeing how this really fixes anything, especially with the speed at which tech is constantly evolving. I just feel like tech is always going to be several steps ahead of regulation and legislation. And so, as long as we are just trying to rely on legislation and regulation, it's not going to help us because it's always going to be outdated.
Well, and their ultimate goal is money, these tech companies. So I watched it was really, really interesting. I forget the name of the series, but it was a limited series on Netflix about the creation of Uber and the guy who did it. In the miniseries, they talked about the fact that they were trying to do something where they were collecting data or tracking people in a way that was pretty unethical, and it violated the Apple terms and conditions to be in the App Store on Apple. And so they were like, what are we going to do? Blah, blah, blah. And so they set up this GeoNet or something around Apple so that within that sphere, they saw a different version of the app or whatever than outside the sphere. And they got away with it for quite some time. And then Apple found it. And in the miniseries, Tim Cook comes down and is like, you ever fucking do that again, you're done. You'll be off Apple forever. But they figured out a way around it to still get to do what they wanted to do. And I'm sure it's representative, even if some of the details are fuzzy or whatever in that, it's representative of what they do. This is how
Yeah.
they operate. So yeah.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Hmm.
All right. So, some of his general ideas, because if you've listened this far, whether you agree or not, or whatever, you probably want to know what the hell you're actually supposed to do. So, here are some of the things that he actually suggests: more and better real world experiences. I don't imagine anyone is like, no, that's a terrible idea. Less and better, like more quality screen time. Again, I'm not sure that there's anyone that's like, no, I think we should definitely be wasting our time on mind numbing screen time. He says, embrace nature. I'm like, like if you love nature, by all means, go for it. I've lived in the countryside, in small towns. I've lived in the mountains. I've lived near the beach. I've lived in cities in Asia and Europe and the United States. Nature is just not my thing. And the idea that I have to be awed by nature and also go camping to find better balance in my life is just one of those really annoying things for me. Specific things that he mentioned. So he has it broken down for ages 0 to 5, then 6 to 13, and then 14 to 18. So I just figured I'd quickly cover the 6 to 13 because I feel like that's kind of that sweet spot for a lot of our homeschoolers. So, first, practice letting your kids out of your sight without them having a way to reach you. I don't really understand why, honestly. When I was a kid, I absolutely called my parents from a payphone at the come and go gas station on more than one occasion, right? Whenever I needed them because I was out and like you knew where the closest payphone was and you knew how to do the collect call where you called and said what you needed.
Hmm.
Like, why are kids not allowed to be able to contact their parents now?
Hmm.
You're not going to find a payphone. And if they're not allowed to have a cell phone or a watch that connects or anything, I don't understand why now they're not allowed to have any way to contact their parents. Maybe you don't need to be in touch with them constantly, but this idea of like they need to be out of your and no way to reach you, like, oh, bite me. Again, encourage sleepovers and don't micromanage them. I already covered that extensively. I do not think that predatory behavior from friends and family members is a fundamental rite of passage that all kids need to survive to grow up well. I just don't. Thank you. Encourage walking to school in a group. I mean, okay, as homeschoolers, we're probably not really going to be able to do that. But generally speaking, I do agree that there should be more kids palling around the neighborhood and going to places and doing things together in small groups. We don't necessarily need a throwback to 80s Stranger Things stuff. Yeah, kids do need a little bit more independence, I think.
It's Saturday night at 9:30. Two of my children are at a park right now with a group of teenagers. So there you go. They're
Yeah,
palling. They're doing their thing.
yeah, exactly. Okay, after school is for free play. Again, I don't think that that's a huge like homeschoolers like what free play, we don't need free play. We generally agree with that. I don't fully understand why it always has to be with other kids according to this author. I think that we need to be teaching our kids how to be bored and entertain themselves and be on their own sometimes instead of always having to rely on other kids around them. And I think he misses that by a mile in this book and a lot of the stuff he's talking about. His next thing is camping. Okay, go camping, whatever. Like I'll stick with the resort with kids club. Mm,
Love camping for the record. So we'll do the camping for you. We're good.
Uh, I mean, but his whole thing is like, you got to go and like they just are out there with the other kids and you never see them and you don't know where they are. And I'm like, really? That has to, I don't, okay, whatever. Find a sleepaway camp with no devices and no safetyism. He's really hung up on this idea of safety. For me, that's a maybe. I do not get why he is so devoted to making sure kids have easily avoidable traumatic experiences. Sleepaway camp is fine if your kid is into it. I don't think you need to require that your kid go to sleepaway camp. There are kids that don't love it. And
Like, 2 of mine have been to sleepaway camp, but I've never messaged the camp ahead of time and been like, "Can you please explain to me just how few safety procedures you have in place?" Like, they
yeah,
j they've just gone to camp.
I went to sleepaway camp every summer and I loved it. It was 100% my thing. But there was definitely, again, a payphone
Mm.
that was
Mhm.
used to call home. This idea that they need to go away and have no way of getting in touch with you at all. Hi, why are you so obsessed with like going back to the dark ages? Not even the 80s and 90s,
Mhm.
not even the way it was when I was growing up. I don't. Okay. But then he wraps it up with like more sleep, less screens. Okay. The general recommendation is no more than 2 hours a day of recreational screen use, delay the opening of social media accounts until the age of 16, and keep open dialogue with your preteen. I don't think that there's anything in that that anyone who's listening is like, oh, I've never heard of that. Whether or not it's easy to implement, that's a different story. But I think most of us have seen this, have heard it,
Mhm.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah,
Now,
it's not revolutionary.
yeah, absolutely. I will say he does talk about what schools can do and highlights more play. Again, as homeschoolers, I think we've got this covered. Phone free schools. This is trickier, I think, as homeschoolers, but you could something you can definitely play around with and see how you make that work during your schooling and how you help focus on educational activities instead of getting distracted by social media and games and whatever else. And he mentions the Let Grow project. And I looked into this before. I think it's a pretty interesting initiative. I'm definitely looking into ways that we, Homeschool Moms Unfiltered, can do like a modified version of that program, probably over on our Patreon, somewhere where we can do it and you can get encouragement and support and ideas and like whatever else you need to help support you and your kiddo as you work to get outside of your comfort zones while you develop these life skills and practice these life skills. Because it's one thing to do it once and do it successfully. It's another thing to do it once, do it successfully, and then make sure that you keep doing it.
Mhm.
And I think it's hard to do that as homeschoolers because they're programs that are designed for brick and mortar schools. And so you have the entire school doing it and people are signing on and whatever. So it can be nice to have like a little group of people that are doing it together. So I think
Mhm.
we're gonna look at some ways that we can do some kind of a modified version. So keep an eye on it. We'll probably talk about it here in the podcast. It'll probably be in our newsletter. So if you aren't signed up for Patreon, you can go sign up even just as a free member,
Mhm.
and you'll get the monthly newsletter. And we'll announce if we're doing something like that or when we're rolling it out, what that looks like. So sign up there at least so you can stay in touch or whatever. Yeah.
Mhm. So I think my final thought from this theme of screens being the downfall of society was a quote that was in the book from Sean Parker, who was one of the Facebook founders. And in 2017, he gave an interview where he said their goal was to create, quote, a social validation feedback loop, exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with because you're exploiting vulnerability in human psychology, end quote. And I was like, fuck. So that felt like an ending note for today's episode. We've got a mantra for you, so don't disappear. But yeah, fuck, right? Like, holy shit, right?
What could possibly go wrong with exploiting vulnerabilities in human psychology?
Exactly. And to be that
In
open about it
children.
too, right?
Yeah. In
Yeah.
children.
Yeah.
Best.
All right. So if you could, before this episode ends or right when it ends, give us a like and a follow wherever you're listening. It helps us reach more secular progressive homeschoolers who are looking for community and looking for homeschool support. And we are happy to be that support while occasionally ranting about men in corporate America. So, yeah, our mantra for the day. You want to do our mantra for the day, Amanda? You want to wrap us up?
Sure. All right. So reading with like minded people transforms books from information into insight. It's where ideas get tested, assumptions get unpacked, and the homeschool journey starts to feel shared instead of solo.
So come
Yeah.
join us for a book club. We're super
Yeah.
chill. If you don't read, we don't care. You can come in your pajamas. You can come with a margarita. Like, we do not care. So just come, enjoy the conversation, contribute to the conversation, be a fly on the wall. Whatever works for you works for us. But in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Yeah. Have a great one.